You're live.
Okay, all right. I'm
Nobody's
on.
there, I'm sure.
Yeah,
Yet.
right. No one's here probably yet, but sorry again, uh, for the delays. Okay, and then what happens when I don't? I do it anyway, and here's why. I do it because I know at the end of it, I'm going to feel, if I find it's a repeating pattern that I am feeling resentful of the thing, no matter what it is, then I reevaluate and I make a change. So, like I was saying, like with the walking, that's why I did that, because there were too many Sundays where I started saying, I don't really want to go outside, and then also noticing how I felt after the walk. So, for example, say on certain Sundays, maybe we had other things going on. It's like my one day off, and I had to get my steps in. So, like, not only did I have to get my steps in, but there were other things going on during that day, and then I ended up like maybe not having time to like read or do other things. So I always try to root out resentment. If I notice it, then I stop it, whatever it is, make a change. So I think that's the line you find with yourself, asking yourself, like, when you say, I don't feel like doing that, then start to notice, well, after you've done the thing, do you feel better or worse? Or do you feel resentful or not? And what I really like about, say, walking, even though it's not the most exciting thing in the world, I feel really good when I'm doing it, and especially after I've done it. Like a day where I walk 6 miles, it's almost impossible, almost. So I won't say it's completely impossible, but it's almost impossible to be in a bad mood after you've walked 6 miles. Like if I'm in a terrible mood, if I go out, I mean, like I'm saying the worst moods, like by about mile 2, stop being quite so upset about the thing. By the time I hit like mile 5, I'm feeling good about life again, and then at the end of it, I feel really good. So, um, anyway, so there you go. But again, you gotta figure out how to make a deal with yourself, and usually that comes, I think, from saying, if you start to notice that you are feeling better after a workout, then reminding yourself of that, or whatever exercise you choose. Okay, so next question is, I am doing a 16-8 and tend to eat lunch and dinner. Is it okay to skip a meal if I don't feel hungry? Well, I mean, I do 1 meal a day most days, and so that's like skipping 2 meals every day, right? And I feel great when I do OMAD. Not everybody is like that, though. I think the most important thing with this kind of question, first of all, I'm not a doctor, so I want to make that clear. I'm not a nutritionist, so I can just tell you what I've experienced. As long as I'm feeling good, I feel like I'm fine with skipping meals. What I think the danger could be is if you're punishing yourself by skipping meals, like if you're trying to hasten your weight loss and punish yourself. I think that is not healthy. But if you're saying, hey, I'm going to eat when I'm hungry and I'm not hungry right now, and you're being honest with yourself, then I think I've not experienced any downsides from that. As far as like when I eat OMAD, that's usually the days I feel my absolute best. Usually, it's not always the case though, but usually. And I think going based off of your hunger is a really good way to go about it, as long as you're not stress eating, because that is, I think, where a lot of us get in trouble. Okay, so this question is, I recently gained back 15 or 45 pounds that I lost with intermittent fasting after going through a stressful time. I'm having a hard time getting back on track. Any suggestions? Well, first of all, I want to say congratulations for continuing to hold yourself accountable. What happens is you have that, well, I just don't want to think about it, just don't want to weigh anymore because it's driving me crazy or something. And that's the temptation. It's a very real temptation to try to say, like, stick your head in the sand, right? But you're not doing that. You're saying, okay, I've gained weight back, what do I do now? And so, first of all, I'm sorry you went through a stressful time, and that is a thing, right? Life's hard sometimes. Sometimes it's like really, really hard, and I think it's really important to be kind to yourself.
You're live.
Okay, all right. Okay, thanks for bearing with me, you guys. I'm sorry that we're having connection problems. So, do we know where we stopped with this one, Jay?
I think you said stressful times are hard.
Yeah, stressful times are hard. And it is very common when you're going through a stressful time to revert back to behaviors, like that are kind of comforting. So certainly eating, stress eating, if that's been a thing, because certainly I am very mindful of myself with when it comes to stress eating, because I know that is my tendency, is to eat more when I'm stressed. So we all go through stressful things, and so it's really good that you have acknowledged that it's like, okay, I gained it, so what do you do? And continuing to hold yourself accountable, continue to weigh, and then also, and I don't know if the recommendation that I made for Dr. Kristen Neff's book, Self-Compassion, was cut off, but I highly recommend that book. It's a really good book. To give yourself some compassion, some forgiveness, like, because what can happen is if you're perfectionistic, which I have been in the past, and I still am recovering from that. I try very hard to root out my perfectionism, but we have these tendencies, right? So the perfectionist tendency is to be really hard on ourselves when we, like, if you gain any weight, then it's like this negative self-talk can start. So making sure that you're not talking to yourself in a negative way, that you continue to be nice to yourself and give yourself compassion. Thinking, what helps me is to try to think of how I would talk to my best friend or to my daughter if she had gained 15 pounds. Like, let's say she had lost 45 and regained 15. What kinds of things might I say to her? I certainly would not be berating her, but yet in my own head, that's what can start to happen if I let my self-talk just kind of run in whatever direction it wants to run. So getting a handle on that. But now, as far as just practically looking at what to do. So the first thing I would do is ask yourself, why did you start going back to your old pattern, right? Because it sounds like that's what happened. Maybe you were stress eating, but what were the things that you stopped doing, and like, why? Was it because you really don't enjoy intermittent fasting? That's a possibility, right? Or it might have just been straight up stressing, like, hey, I was stressed. Maybe you're going through a really horrible time. And stress eating, it does calm down your nerves. It really does. That's why it's such a hard habit to break. It's because food is comforting. It's one of the most natural ways to comfort ourselves. So kind of digging into that, try to learn as much as you can about yourself from these situations. I've found you really learn the most about yourself when you are going through a hard time, or when in hindsight you can say, man, I was going through a hard time there, and what things were going on. Like, what was your self-talk like? That's a good thing to explore. What was your self-talk like, and what were the actual actions you were taking? And think back to when you were losing weight. Hopefully you were keeping some good notes, and if you weren't, that's why I really recommend, like, writing down what you're doing, what's giving you results, and being kind of scientific about it, because it can show you that it's not just magic. Because that used to be my kind of way I would think about weight loss, was like, it was kind of just luck, like, well, that diet worked or it didn't. But really, it's really more about the actions that you're taking consistently over time, whether a thing works or not for you. And doesn't mean that you failed. It just means, well, that plan wasn't a good fit. So if you are finding, well, like, intermittent fasting wasn't a good fit, as it turns out, because when a stressful situation came along, I realized, like, oh, I just hate intermittent fasting. Well, that's something that you learn. But it could just be that intermittent fasting does work and you just got out of the habit. And if that's the case, then I would say it's a matter of getting back into the habit. I personally advocate for a very slow, gradual transition. So if, like, you're eating 3 meals a day, the way I started out with intermittent fasting was I would set a cutoff time for my eating at night, and then I would say I won't eat before a certain time in the morning. So, like, in the beginning, it was an 8-hour window, which is, most people would say, well, you can't get results from that. Well, that's what I started with. Like, I won't eat after 10 o'clock, and I won't eat before 6 o'clock in the morning. There's one little time bound.
Connecting your life.
I'm live for now. Sorry again, you guys. Okay, so, but not holding yourself to a ridiculous standard. In other words, if you say you used to be OMAD for a long time, and then when you started gaining weight, you were actually eating, like, say, 3 times a day, and you're snacking around and that kind of thing, don't expect yourself to go straight back to OMAD. And instead, take it in a slow and steady kind of way. Work your way up to whatever kind of window that gives you results and that you enjoy, and then stick with it consistently. Because what tends to happen is people think, well, I used to be able to do OMAD, or I used to be able to do it this way, and then they try to go, like, to these extremes. But instead, try to find that sustainable way for yourself. Hopefully that helps you. Okay, so here we go. I'm on the edge between overweight and normal, and it seems like I'm at a standstill for 6 months after losing 5 pounds. I normally do an 18.6. Any suggestions? Okay, so I will let you know what my experience has been, because in my experience, the weight loss slows way down once you get right on that edge between normal and overweight. And so, for example, I stayed like in 2016, I got down to 157, and I decided, okay, going into the holiday season, and I felt really good, actually. I felt great, and I was happy with how I looked. The technicality of being like 3 pounds overweight according to BMI, I thought, I don't really care about that, because what I cared most about was how I felt about myself. How comfortable did I feel in my own skin? I felt great there. So I decided to maintain there, and I maintained until I started this channel. And so I decided to lose more, and I did that mainly because of that technicality, the 3 pounds being technically overweight. I really did that, I think, in hindsight. I think my main motivation was I kind of was afraid people would think I was a hypocrite for talking about weight loss when still I was, technically overweight. And I've changed my thinking on that since then. I think that anybody who wants to talk about what they're going through should talk about what they're going through. You don't have to be perfect, in other words. And so I lost weight from let's see, that would be September 2017. I think for like a year I was losing weight, and I lost, even though I was doing OMAD, and I was being very consistent. I was doing OMAD, I was walking 6 miles every day, and I was taking my cheat day on Sunday. My weight loss during that time was 1/3 of a pound a week on average. That's pretty slow. That feels like no progress, So, so I would just say, that maybe it is really, really slow. How consistent are you being? I mean, I was being very, very consistent, and that's how quickly I was losing. And then also, I will let you know, I didn't feel different. I mean, I lost, what was that, 15, 17 pounds, something like that. And I felt no different, really, as far as, I was still able to do all the things, going from, say, 222 down to 157, huge difference in how I felt physically, even. I could lay down and not feel like I'm having trouble breathing right now, it was just too heavy on my chest or something. I was able to move around, and I was walking 6 miles a day, and it wasn't like there was this big change. Actually, there was no change. The only thing that really changed for me was the number on the scale. And so that was an interesting thing to learn for myself. As far as my body went, I felt that it looked the same. I mean, maybe you can go back and try to compare how my face looked, on my oldest videos versus what they looked like, say, at the end of 2018. But really, I felt no different. And so my point is, I don't know how much more you're wanting to lose, because you're doing an 18.6 right now, and if you're wanting to lose more and you're not losing on an 18.6, then something has to change, right?
You're live.
Okay, all right. So what I was saying is, so you have to kind of make a choice. If it is really important to you to lose more, then how much more and why. And then if you're being really consistent, the first thing I would check is, how consistent are you being with the 18.6? But if you've been very consistent with an 18.6 and nothing's changing, then you have some options. One is you can make your fasting window longer, so your eating window shorter, or you can have smaller meals. Now, I'm not good with smaller meals, okay? I prefer big meals, and that's why OMAD works really well for me. But you kind of have to make a deal with yourself, and so that takes a lot of introspection, figuring out why, what are your own motivations, what are you hoping will happen if you lose down, say, let's say, what do you think might happen if you lose 15 more pounds, and and then go based off of that. So hopefully that helps you. Okay, whoops, I almost dropped one. Okay, sometimes I fast for 16 hours or 17 or 19. Should I stick to the same time, or is some fluctuation okay? Well, you are free to do whatever you want to do, and I think that's the great part about intermittent fasting, is you can figure out what works for you. There is no intermittent fasting police, so you can really make your own rules. Here's what I've noticed about keeping your window at about the same time every day. I was never really strict. When in the beginning, I tried to keep it really easy for myself. So I would just say between the hours of, say I'll eat between 2 and 8 every day, like if I was doing an 18-6. And in the beginning, that was very, very helpful because it really just simplified my life. I never did the whole calculations thing. So like I wouldn't say, well, I ate my last meal at whatever time, and then trying to do that the next day. I'm not good with that. I can't keep track of all that stuff in my head. So instead, what worked was to say, okay, between 2 and 6. And at first, I would want to eat right at 2 because that was like exciting, like, yay, my window's open. But over time, it started to matter less to me. It was like, oh, well, it's 3 o'clock. Well, I can eat now. And it was fine. So that's what I would do. I would just go based off of when I was hungry. So I became more laid back in that way. I have noticed certainly that my body tends to get hungry at the same time it ate the day before. So it's almost like automatic. It's almost like I don't even have to really look at a clock at a certain point because my body tells me. So that's kind of the thing that can make fasting more difficult is like if you say, well, I'm going to eat at 2 every day. Oh, well, then in one day you eat at 1. Well, then the next day you get hungry at 1. So then it's like you're eating at 1. And then if you go back further and further, what ends up happening, or what can happen, is that you end up being very inconsistent with your fasting window. And then you end up not having results, which then ends in quitting. So, but you're allowed to do whatever you want to do. So I would say try to be kind of consistent at least, and then notice for yourself how sensitive you are to that and what your results are. I always go based off results and how I'm feeling. Okay, so I think that you've mentioned that you've gone to 2 meals a day in maintenance. If that's the case, can you share what impact, if any, that's had on your weight? Do you still do a cheat day with 2 meals a day? Okay, so yes. So I don't do, this answer will probably frustrate some of you out there. I'm very loose in maintenance mode because, again, this is about knowing myself well. And so I try to keep as loose a rein on myself as possible with still maintaining a range. So like for me, what I decided was I want to be in the 140s. That's it. That's my rule. Like I want to be in the 140s. If I go above, if I get to 150 or above that, then I will make a concerted effort to get back down into the 140s. Otherwise, I don't have very many rules. I tend to do some form of intermittent fasting every day. Like usually I am not hungry at breakfast. I've experimented, but so far I've been able to maintain doing, like
You said get used to it. Oh, no, you're live.
Okay, now